Chapter 3. I was leaning back in the recliner, my now 3.5-year-old daughter asleep on my lap. My wife sat down across from me. Dennis, she fidgeted, nervous about something. I asked Terry and Jan to come down on Friday. I shifted gently towards her, careful not to wake my little girl. She said, I have something I need to tell you, and I want them here for it. Heat rose up in my chest and neck. It's Wednesday night, I said, and I have to wait till Friday to find out. I knew it was something bad. Our marriage had soured over the past couple of years. She'd grown distant and would argue with me over any little thing. She had even started not coming home at night. She shrugged and stared at the floor. What did you do? She didn't answer. Did you sleep with somebody? She shook her head. It's worse than that. Worse than sleeping with somebody else? A commercial ended, then the news came back on. But I no longer heard it. My brain was flexing, trying to figure it out. I came up blank. My little girl kicked and her head slid from my shoulder to my elbow. I looked down at her, eyes squeezed shut, her mouth slightly open. A terrible thought burst into my head. I looked from my daughter to my wife. The words barely came out. Is she mine? My wife bolted from the room before the last word was out of my mouth. The pain hit instantly. I would have hurt less if the house had collapsed on top of me. I broke down, huffing to catch my breath, nearly blind from tears and rage. I was still able to gently get my daughter to her bed. Then I left. I drove immediately to northern Wisconsin, stopping only once for gas. I had a buddy up there who had been a state wrestling champ for 4 years in a row. He was 6'4", almost 300 pounds. He was an animal. I needed an animal. I needed someone big enough to babysit me so I didn't hurt someone or kill myself. For a few days, I raged around his house, jerking from moment to moment in a fury. But as the weekend drew to an end, I started calming down until I found myself Sunday morning, sitting on his couch, back in my right mind. I thought clearly about my situation. It hurt, but I knew there was only one thing to do. That afternoon, I drove home. I found my wife and asked her calmly to sit with me in the kitchen. She looked afraid as she took a chair. I breathed deeply. If I kick you out, I said, the ones who are going to suffer are the kids. But they didn't do anything. Our daughter didn't do anything wrong. I had to close my eyes and take a moment. I believe this. Danica never stopped being my daughter. To this day and forever, I am still her dad. I'm going to swallow my pride. Now that I know what the problem is, let's work on it. Let's go to counseling. Counseling didn't help. We went to our first session, but didn't schedule a second. Before long, I found out she had another boyfriend. I divorced her. She took the kids. I stayed in the house. No building ever felt so empty. Every night I'd pace around for hours until I broke down. Months went by like this. Finally, I told my boss to get me out of town. If I stayed in that house any longer, I was going to go nuts. I was going to hurt somebody. He sent me to Okoboji, Iowa. I drive down there half out of my mind with grief and hurt. My second night, I went out with a couple of guys to a strip club. I stumbled through the door looking for trouble. I slapped my money on the bar and shot back a glass of straight Jack Daniels. It was my first drink in 16 years. I always did drugs. I was basically a high-functioning addict my whole life, but I hadn't had alcohol since I was 19. In that strip club outside of Okoboji, I drank hard. I quickly lost track of how many shots I had. Months of frustration and grief burned hotter inside of me as the edges of the bar drifted out of focus. I gulped down more whiskey and waited for something to happen. Within a half hour, the bouncer was on the floor, his face a smear of blood. My friends pulled me off while I was still screaming nonsense. I shrugged them away and pounded out the door. For a few moments, everything made sense. Someone hurt me, so I hurt someone else. That was how it worked. That was how I coped. It was the only thing I understood. I stumbled into the next bar. I slapped my money on the counter and took a shot. The ground heaved underneath me. Someone gave me the wrong look and moved the wrong way or said something. 5 minutes after I walked through the door, I was on top of a stranger. There was a lot of blood. As bad as that night was, it was only the beginning. When you don't know how to deal with pain, the pain never goes away. So I kept fighting. After a few weeks, a police chief in Okoboji tried to talk sense into me. When we sat down, he didn't call me Dennis. He called me by my new nickname, Psycho. But I wasn't psycho. I understood what I was doing. I understood the consequences of my actions. I simply didn't care. None of it mattered. I hurt so bad I was hoping somebody would kill me. I wanted to die. I lost everything and didn't know how to deal with it. I had no coping skills. So for the next 3 years, I dealt with my pain the only way I knew: drugs, violence, and darkness. I saw bad things. I did bad things. I was not a nice guy.